Stone Mountain, Georgia, 16 miles northeast of downtown Atlanta. You've probably seen it on a map and never thought twice about it. It's the kind of place where people mow their lawns on Saturday mornings and complain about HOA fees. Not exactly the backdrop you'd expect for one of the most sophisticated drug pipelines the American South has ever produced. But that's exactly the point. Albert Ross lived there, quietly, comfortably, while simultaneously running a cocaine operation that stretched from Humboldt County, California, through Texas, through Atlanta, all the way to a meeting room in Mexico City, where he sat across the table from people the United States government would eventually classify as terrorists. They called him Big, and before we go any further, that name wasn't about ego. That was basically a job description. And the nickname came straight from the size of the cocaine shipments he was moving. The people who gave him that name weren't trying to be clever. They were just being accurate. This is the story of Big Al Ross, and I promise you, by the time we get to the end of this, you're going to understand exactly how a man from suburban Georgia ended up doing business with one of the most dangerous cartels on the planet. If you ain't subscribed yet, go ahead and hit subscribe. Drop a name in the comments if there's someone you want me to cover next. All right, let's get into it. Pull up Albert Ross's criminal history before the federal case, and you'll find something that, in hindsight, reads less like a rap sheet and more like a warning nobody acted on. Prior felony drug conviction, Fulton County Superior Court. Numerous felony arrests for drug trafficking, and a mugshot sitting in the system dated June 2005, nearly 2 decades before the federal case that finally closed the book on him. 2 decades. That ain't a man who just slipped through some crack in the system. That's a man who studied the crack, widened it, and kept walking through it over and over again. Every arrest that didn't stick, every conviction that didn't slow him down, he was learning what not to do. And every time he came back, the operation was tighter, more insulation, more structure, more space between him and the product. Now let me say this up front. I'm not here to glorify the man, but a cartel-connected cocaine empire doesn't just pop up in Stone Mountain, Georgia by accident. What you're looking at here wasn't some sudden come-up. This was the result of years and years of learning the system, figuring out where it was weak, how to move around it, and how to stay one step ahead of the consequences. And by the time federal investigators started seriously looking at him, he had already spent years perfecting the art of not being caught. U.S. Attorney Peter Leary described it at sentencing as directing, and these are his exact words, enormous amounts of deadly drugs into Georgia from Mexico for many years, harming our citizens and communities in exchange for a lavish lifestyle. Many years, not a hot run, not a good season, a career. All right, lock in for a second, because this right here is the part that makes this case different from every other drug story you've heard come out of Georgia. In August 2019, Albert Ross boarded a flight to Mexico City, not to vacation, not to sightsee. He and his co-conspirators flew down to sit face to face with his cocaine supplier and that supplier's boss. They negotiated a deal for 200 additional kilograms of cocaine per month. The supplier in question was affiliated with the Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, the CJNG. Now, let me give you a little context so that line lands the way it's supposed to. By 2020, U.S. officials had formally declared the CJNG the single biggest criminal drug threat facing the United States. Not one of several, the biggest. Federal investigators have described their structure not like a gang, but like a corporation. Boards of directors, financial officers, accountants, their words, not mine, a franchise model that lets them expand into new territories by plugging in local operators. And in February 2025, after Ross was already behind bars, the United States Department of State officially designated the CJNG a foreign terrorist organization, formally on paper, years after Ross had already been sitting across the table from them in Mexico City. That's who Albert Ross was doing business with, directly, in person. I want you to sit with that for a second, because just getting that meeting tells you a lot. The CJNG doesn't sit down face to face with people they think are small time. By that point, Ross hadn't just built a drug operation, he'd built real weight, enough volume, enough money moving, that one of the most violent organizations in the Western Hemisphere looked at him and said, "This guy's worth a meeting." That is not a small thing. The numbers that flowed from that relationship were staggering. In one 3-month stretch in 2018, Ross received 1,300 kilograms of cocaine from a separate Mexican supplier because he was running 2 supply chains simultaneously, hedging his inventory like a commodity trader. And if you want the clearest snapshot of what this operation looked like when it was running at full speed, you don't have to guess. Just look at the text messages investigators pulled straight off his own iPhone. Between March 14th and April 4th, 2020, 22 days, Ross received 112 kilograms of cocaine. In that same stretch, he sent more than $2.5 million back to Mexico in payment. 22 days. That's the scale this operation was moving at. 22 days. His own texts, his own phone. I honestly don't know what the thinking was there, but I'll say this, it made the prosecution's job real easy in court. Now, the next part of this story, almost nobody talks about, and it matters because it shows the cocaine wasn't even the whole operation. Running parallel, simultaneously, Ross had a second pipeline going, marijuana, from a stretch of Humboldt County, California, known as Murder Mountain. That's a real place, an isolated, off-grid stretch of the Emerald Triangle with a history of violence, missing persons, and outlaw cannabis production that goes back generations. From Murder Mountain across multiple states into Georgia, 8 trips, 24,000 pounds, cocaine from a cartel the U.S. would later formally designate as a terrorist organization on one track. 24,000 pounds of weed from one of the most notoriously dangerous grow regions in America on another. Once the cocaine landed in Atlanta, it needed to go somewhere safe. Ross made a choice that, even among the choices in this case, stands out. And he stashed it at the home of an elderly family member. That detail right there. I keep coming back to it because this family member hadn't just been enlisted as a storage facility. They had previously been shot, wounded, while picking up drug proceeds at Ross's direction. And still being used, still in it. That one detail tells you more about how Ross viewed the people around him than any court document ever could. On the street level, the distribution network was tight. Lonnie Bennett and Brandon Payne ran a stash house on Pittman Road in College Park. A man from Athens to Michael Darden, known as T-Mike, made over 20 runs between Athens and that stash house. 20 documented trips. Athens, Georgia, home of the University of Georgia. Cartel cocaine moving through a college town, 20 trips at a time. And somewhere in Atlanta, Ross owned a bar, looked legitimate on the outside. When agents raided it alongside his home, they found over $600,000 in drug proceeds sitting inside. The bar's name never appeared in any public record, which, honestly, is exactly how a good front business is supposed to work. Now, before we get to the arrest, we gotta rewind for a second. Back to March 2018, more than a year before that meeting in Mexico City. Cause this right here, this is where the crack started to show. Ross and a business partner move a load, approximately $4 million worth of cocaine from Texas to Georgia inside a tractor trailer. It's hidden in a false wall built into the body of the truck. The kind of concealment that takes real money and real craftsmanship to construct. A Georgia state trooper on Interstate 20 pulls the truck over, finds the wall, finds 152 kilograms of cocaine, $4 million, gone in a traffic stop. What Ross did next, he admitted to this himself in his guilty plea. Read aloud in open court, he reached out to a co-conspirator and ordered a hit on the person responsible for overseeing the failed load. The co-conspirator refused, and that line just sits there in the record. The co-conspirator refused. No name, no context, no explanation of what happened next. Whoever told Ross no that day was either sealed out of the public filings or never identified in the record at all. But think about what that moment was. Inside a criminal organization that had just sent men to Mexico City to negotiate with a terrorist cartel, one person looked at that order from their boss and said, "No, we don't know if it was conscience. We don't know if they were already cooperating with the FBI. We don't know if they were just scared. We will probably never know. What we do know is that the order was given, and Ross admitted it." 9 months later, December 2018, the DEA receives a tip. Ross is moving cash on a private aircraft out of Peachtree DeKalb Airport. Agents watch men leave the Boulder Crest Road stash house. 4 suitcases, 2 backpacks. They board the plane. DEA and FBI agents are already on the ground in California before the wheels touch down. Over $2 million in drug proceeds seized from the luggage. 2 massive hits in less than a year. $4 million in cocaine, $2 million in cash. A normal operation would have collapsed. Ross kept moving, but the FBI Athens resident agency had been building in the background for years. Wiretaps, physical surveillance, vehicle trackers, confidential informants, over 20 law enforcement agencies working the same case across multiple jurisdictions. That level of architecture doesn't get built without intelligence coming from inside. Someone in Ross's world had been feeding information to federal investigators and had been for years. He just didn't know it. September 23, 2021. Agents arrive at Albert Ross's home in Stone Mountain. In his bedroom closet, over $300,000 in cash, wrapped in tinfoil, vacuum sealed inside black trash bags. Let that image settle. The man who flew to Mexico City, who negotiated face-to-face with what the U.S. government would later formally designate a foreign terrorist organization, who moved 2,000 kilograms of cocaine and 24,000 pounds of marijuana across multiple states, who put out a contract after losing a load on I-20, keeping his money in the closet like leftovers. Over at his Atlanta bar, another $600,000 in proceeds. And when the full investigation closed out, the total accounting looked like this. What federal agents cataloged at the end of that investigation reads like an evidence manifest from a small war. Over $3 million in cash, 73 firearms, more than 165 kilos of cocaine, along with fentanyl, heroin, crack, methamphetamine, and nearly 200 units of controlled pharmaceuticals. All of it seized, all of it documented. Read that inventory slow. Every line on that list represents a supply chain, customers, communities, people who will never fully come back from what flowed out of that operation. January 22nd, 2024. Albert Ross stood in U.S. District Court in Macon, Georgia, before Judge Tillman Tripp Self III and pled guilty. 1 count of conspiracy to possess with intent to distribute cocaine. 1 count of conspiracy to possess with intent to distribute marijuana. He admitted on the record to leading the organization. Every word read back to him in open court. June 10th, 2024. 2 life sentences, statutory maximum, $1 million fine, 5 years supervised release, which he will never see because there is no parole in the federal system, and Albert Ross will spend every remaining day of his life inside a federal prison. FBI Atlanta's Macon Supervisory Senior Resident Agent Robert Gibbs said it simply: Albert Ross, deserves every day in prison that he has been sentenced after distributing such a huge amount of drugs into Middle Georgia. And before we close, there's one detail in this case that really sticks with me. Not the money, not the cartel connection, not the private jets. That elderly family member, already shot once while picking up drug money for Ross, and still being used later as a place to stash cocaine. Their name never showed up in the public record. No charges, no press release, nothing. Just another person the machine rolled over and kept moving. That's the part of these stories that gets buried under the big numbers and the federal indictments. The human cost isn't always in the courtroom. Sometimes it's in a house where an elderly person was hurt doing Ross's work and never made the news. Sometimes it's a college student in Athens who had no idea the cocaine they bought had a chain that went all the way to a meeting room in Mexico City. Ross built something, he really did, but the foundation was other people's lives. And in the end, they found him with $300,000 in tinfoil in a trash bag. That's not a legacy. That's a punchline with a life sentence attached.